Okay, I need to say this right at the top because it's going to sound completely made up. There are 9-foot worms living under the ocean floor. Not on the ocean floor, under it.
1.5 miles beneath the surface of the Pacific Ocean, in volcanic caves where sunlight has never reached, where the pressure would crush a human instantly, where the water is filled with toxic hydrogen sulfide.
Which would kill most life forms.
And these worms are thriving, growing, reproducing. They have no mouth, no stomach, no digestive system whatsoever. And scientists just discovered in 2024 that they've been hiding beneath the seafloor this whole time.
When you say it like that, it sounds like the pitch for a horror movie.
Honestly, Marcus, when the researchers first flipped over those volcanic rocks and found these ghostly white worms staring back at them from underground cavities, I think a few of them felt like they were in a horror movie.
So today we're diving, literally, into one of the most mind-bending discoveries of 2024. I'm Marcus Chen.
And I'm Dr. Elena Vasquez, and we're going to talk about giant tubeworms, the impossible ecosystems beneath hydrothermal vents, why these creatures challenge everything we thought we knew about where life can exist, and what this means for the search for aliens on other worlds.
Plus, we'll discuss why some people want to strip mine these environments before we've even finished discovering what lives there.
Which is the part that keeps me up at night.
Cheerful stuff. Welcome to giant tube worms living 1.6 miles under the sea floor. Strap in because this one gets weird.
All right, Elena, let's set the stage. October 2024, a paper drops in Nature Communications. What did they find?
So a team led by Dr. Monica Bright from the University of Vienna, along with collaborators including Dr. Sabine Gallner from the Royal Netherlands Institute for Sea Research, published findings from an expedition in summer 2023. They'd taken the Schmidt Ocean Institute's research vessel Falkor 2 to the East Pacific Ridge, a volcanically active ridge where two tectonic plates are pulling apart.
Classic hydrothermal vent territory.
Exactly. They were about 8,250 feet down, roughly 2,515 meters, at a site called the Fava Flow Suburbs near the Tika vent field. Now, we've known about life around hydrothermal vents since 1977. That's not new. What was new was their hypothesis. They suspected life might exist beneath the vents, in the sub-seafloor crust.
And when you say sub-seafloor crust, you mean?
The volcanic rock beneath the visible ocean floor. The seafloor isn't solid, it's porous, full of cracks and fissures where water circulates. Monica Bright suspected that animals might be traveling through these cracks, using the warm vent fluids as a kind of underground highway system.
So how do you test that hypothesis? You can't exactly dig a hole at the bottom of the ocean.
Well, that's essentially what they did. They used a remotely operated vehicle called Sebastian, a remarkable underwater robot, equipped with a chisel. They drilled small holes into the seafloor rock, then used the ROV's manipulator arm to flip over sections of volcanic crust. Basically, they lifted the lid off the ocean floor.
And what was underneath?
Monica Bright described the moment as spectacular. Her exact words were, "There were animals, 50 centimeters long, lying in there, alive." They found warm, fluid-filled cavities, essentially volcanic caves, teeming with giant tube worms, some up to 0.5 meter long, plus worms, snails, mussels, and chemosynthetic bacteria.
Hold on, I need to process this. They lifted a rock at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean and found caves full of giant worms underneath?
Yes, caves connected to the hydrothermal vent system, filled with water at a balmy 75 degrees Fahrenheit, about 24 Celsius, much warmer than the near-freezing deep ocean water surrounding them.
That's practically a hot tub by deep sea standards.
Exactly. And remember, this is happening 1.6 miles below the surface, in complete darkness, under crushing pressure, in an environment saturated with hydrogen sulfide. Yet, here's this thriving ecosystem we never knew existed.
Okay, so the headline-grabbing claim in your document was 1.6 miles under the seafloor, but if the seafloor is at 8,250 feet and these caves are just beneath the surface of that?
Good catch. The worms are 1.6 miles below the ocean surface, living in shallow cavities beneath the seafloor, maybe a meter or two below the visible ocean floor itself. The depth beneath the seafloor is relatively shallow, but the implications are enormous because we didn't know animal life could exist there at all.
So it's not like these worms are burrowing miles into the Earth's crust.
No, but here's where it gets interesting. We don't know how deep these cavities extend. Monica Bright speculated that the maximum limit for animal life might be a few meters beneath the seafloor before it gets too hot. Remember, you're getting closer to magma as you go down. But that's just speculation. The sub-seafloor biosphere for animal life is essentially unexplored.
So we've mapped more of the moon's surface than we've explored what's living under our own ocean floor?
Significantly more. We've explored about 5% of Earth's oceans. The sub-seafloor, virtually nothing. Until this discovery, the prevailing belief was that only microbes and viruses could survive beneath hydrothermal vents.
And now we know that's wrong.
Spectacularly wrong. The discovery, as Dr. Jayotika Vermani from the Schmidt Ocean Institute said, provides fresh evidence that life exists in incredible places.
Okay, let's back up for a second because I realize we've jumped into the deep end, pun intended, without explaining what hydrothermal vents actually are. For our listeners who haven't done a marine biology degree, what are we talking about?
Great question. So hydrothermal vents are essentially underwater hot springs, but far more extreme than anything you'd find on land. They form in volcanically active areas, typically along mid-ocean ridges where tectonic plates are pulling apart.
Cold seawater seeps down through cracks in the seafloor, gets superheated by magma chambers below, and then shoots back up through openings on the ocean floor.
How hot are we talking? The famous black smokers, the most dramatic type of vent, can reach 350 to 400 degrees Celsius. That's around 750 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt lead.
Wait, how does water get that hot without turning to steam?
Pressure. At those depths, the pressure is so intense, around 250 atmospheres, that water stays liquid even at extreme temperatures. It only boils when it mixes with the cooler surrounding seawater.
And these vents spew chemicals?
Oh, they're basically toxic soup dispensers. The superheated water dissolves minerals and chemicals from the rocks it passes through. Hydrogen sulfide, methane, iron, manganese, copper, zinc. When this mineral-rich fluid hits the cold seawater, the minerals precipitate out, building up these dramatic chimney structures.
The black smokers get their color from the
iron sulfide particles. There are also white smokers that emit lower temperature fluids with different mineral compositions, and countless lower temperature vents that just kind of seep rather than blast.
Okay, so we have these volcanic hot springs at the bottom of the ocean spewing toxic chemicals. This sounds like the last place you'd expect to find life.
Which is exactly what scientists thought until 1977. That's when everything changed.
The original discovery. Tell me about that.
February 17, 1977, the submersible Alvin descended into the Galapagos Rift, about 400 miles west of Ecuador, carrying pilot Jack Donnelly and geologists Jack Corliss and Tej Van Andel. They were looking for hydrothermal vents, which had been theorized but never directly observed. What they found was beyond anything they imagined.
No biologists on the expedition?
None, because nobody expected to find life. The deep ocean was considered a biological desert. Cold, dark, food poor. The assumption was that all life on Earth ultimately depended on sunlight for energy through photosynthesis.
And instead, they found
An oasis. Dense beds of giant clams, some a foot long, strange white crabs, and these extraordinary creatures that had never been seen before. Worms living in white tubes up to 2 meters long, with bright red feather-like plumes waving in the shimmering water.
The giant tubeworms.
Riftia pactilla, to use the scientific name. Corliss reportedly said over the acoustic telephone, "Isn't the deep ocean supposed to be a desert? Well, there's all these animals down here." They dubbed the site the Garden of Eden.
And this was genuinely shocking to science?
One of the geologists compared it to Columbus discovering the Americas, and that's not hyperbole. This discovery fundamentally rewrote our understanding of where life can exist and how it can sustain itself, because these animals weren't getting energy from the sun, they were getting it from chemicals.
Chemosynthesis.
Exactly. Instead of photosynthesis, where plants use sunlight to convert carbon dioxide and water into sugar, chemosynthetic bacteria use chemical reactions to produce energy. Specifically, they oxidize hydrogen sulfide, that toxic chemical that would kill most organisms. These bacteria feed on it.
And the tubeworms?
Don't eat the bacteria. They are the bacteria, in a sense, but let's save that for the next segment, because the biology of Riftia pactilla deserves its own deep dive. Pun intended.
Groan. I walked into that one.
The point is, the 1977 discovery showed that life could thrive completely independent of sunlight. That's revolutionary. It meant the sun wasn't the only possible energy source for ecosystems, and that has huge implications for where else we might find life.
Okay, so 1977 establishes that vent ecosystems exist. Fast forward to 2024, why is the sub-seafloor discovery such a big deal? Isn't it just more of the same?
Not at all. Finding life around vents was shocking in 1977. Finding life beneath the vents, in the volcanic crust itself, is a whole new paradigm. It means these ecosystems extend in directions we never considered. The seafloor isn't the boundary, it's just the visible surface of something much larger.
Like finding an iceberg and realizing you've only seen the tip.
Perfect analogy. And it answers a question that scientists have puzzled for decades. How do hydrothermal vent communities spread?
I assume currents?
That was the assumption. Larvae drift through ocean currents, find new vent sites, and settle. But here's the problem. We've never observed tubeworm larvae in the water column around vents, despite decades of looking. Where are they?
Underground?
That's exactly what Monica Bright proposed. Her hypothesis was that larvae don't disperse through the open ocean, they travel through the sub-seafloor, carried by hydrothermal fluids circulating through the volcanic crust.
So the worms had been using the Earth's crust as a secret highway system.
Potentially, yes. Seawater gets sucked into the crust, mixes with hydrothermal fluids, travels laterally, and emerges somewhere else. Larvae could be hitching rides on this underground river system.
That's actually incredible. They've been traveling in ways we never suspected.
And the 2024 paper found evidence of reproduction happening underground, too. They observed male tubeworms with sperm-filled testes and females with egg-filled gonads in those sub-seafloor cavities.
Underground worm romance. I didn't expect that sentence today.
Corridor. It might be actual habitat where these animals live, breed, and complete their life cycles.
So the visible vent communities we've been studying for almost 50 years might just be the above-ground portion of much larger ecosystems.
That's the implication, and it raises urgent questions about conservation, which we'll get to later.
All right, you promised me we'd dive deep into the biology of giant tubeworms. Let's do it. Start with the basics. What are we looking at?
Riftia pactilla is a species of vestiminoferan tubeworm, part of a group of marine animals that live in chitinous tubes and lack digestive tracts. Adults can reach lengths of 3 meters, nearly 10 feet, with tube diameters of about 4 centimeters. They're found exclusively around hydrothermal vents in the Pacific Ocean.
So they build their own houses?
Exactly. The tube is made of chitin, the same material in insect exoskeletons, secreted by specialized glands. It's their armor, their home, and their anchor. A tubeworm can never leave its tube.
Never?
Never. They're sessile, permanently attached, like barnacles, but much more dramatic. The visible part of the worm when it's extended is that bright red plume at the top.
The feathery bit that looks like a tulip or a giant bottle brush?
Right. That plume is actually called the obturacular region, and it's highly vascularized, full of blood vessels. The red color comes from hemoglobin, just like in human blood.
Wait, worms have hemoglobin?
These worms do, and it's remarkable hemoglobin. It can bind both oxygen and hydrogen sulfides simultaneously without being poisoned by the sulfide. In most animals, including humans, hydrogen sulfide would destroy hemoglobin. Tubeworm hemoglobin has evolved to handle both.
So the plume is for breathing?
For gas exchange, yes. The tubeworm extends its plume into the water to absorb oxygen, hydrogen sulfide, and carbon dioxide. If it senses a threat or is touched, it retracts the plume into the tube and seals it with a special cap called an obturaculum.
Self-contained apartment with a security system. Nice. But here's the thing I don't understand. You said these worms have no digestive system, no mouth, no stomach, no gut, no anus. How does anything survive like that?
This is where it gets wild. Adult Riftia pachytilla survive entirely through symbiosis with bacteria. They have a specialized internal organ called the trophosome, a spongy tissue packed with billions of chemosynthetic bacteria called Candidatus endoriftia persephone.
Billions?
Billions. The trophosome can make up a significant portion of the worm's body mass. It's essentially a bacterial farm inside the worm.
And these bacteria?
These bacteria use chemosynthesis to produce food. The tubeworm absorbs hydrogen sulfide, oxygen, and carbon dioxide through its plume and blood, then delivers these raw materials to the bacteria in the trophosome. The bacteria oxidize the hydrogen sulfide, using it as an energy source, and fix carbon dioxide into organic compounds like sugars, using the Calvin cycle. Same basic carbon-fixing pathway as plants use in photosynthesis, just powered by chemicals instead of light.
So the worm is basically a life support system for a bacterial factory.
That's one way to think about it. The worm provides the bacteria with the chemicals they need and a protected environment. The bacteria produce organic compounds that the worm uses for nutrition. It's one of the most complete mutualistic symbioses in nature. Neither partner can survive without the other.
But if the worm has no digestive system, how does it actually get the food from the bacteria?
Two mechanisms. First, the worm appears to digest some of the bacteria directly, essentially farming and harvesting them. Second, the bacteria may release some organic compounds directly into the worm's blood. Researchers call this milking versus farming.
The worm eats its own internal passengers?
Some of them. It's a carefully balanced relationship. The worm controls the bacterial population while the bacteria provide nutrition. If conditions change, say if the vent goes dormant and sulfide becomes scarce, the worm can adjust by digesting more bacteria to stay alive.
That's simultaneously beautiful and horrifying.
Marine symbiosis often is. But here's what's even more fascinating. The worms aren't born with these bacteria.
They're not?
No. Tubeworm larvae start out as free-swimming organisms with a mouth and a gut, a normal digestive system. They drift through the water, or possibly through the seafloor, as we now suspect, until they detect chemical signatures of an active vent. Then they settle.
And then what?
Once settled, the larvae acquire bacteria from the environment. The bacteria enter through the mouth or skin and colonize the developing worm. As the symbiosis establishes, the worm's digestive system completely degenerates. The mouth seals shut, the gut disappears, the anus vanishes. The worm transforms into a bacterial vessel.
That's like a body horror movie. The larvae are fine, and then they meet bacteria and their organs melt away.
Pleasantly, from our perspective, maybe. From the worm's perspective, it's a highly successful survival strategy that's allowed them to dominate one of Earth's most extreme environments.
How long do they live?
Estimates vary. Some studies suggest they might live a few years. Others propose they could persist for decades if their vent remains active. What's remarkable is their growth rate. Riftia pachytilla has the fastest growth rate of any known marine invertebrate.
Fastest growth rate? How fast?
They can colonize a new vent site, grow to sexual maturity, and reach lengths of 1.5 meters, about 5 feet, in less than 2 years.
That's absurd. What's driving that growth?
The efficiency of the chemosynthetic symbiosis. They have access to virtually unlimited energy from the vent chemicals, so they can pour everything into growth and reproduction. At active vents, life is abundant. The ecosystem is extremely productive despite being far from the sun.
So these things are basically invasive species that colonize new vents with terrifying efficiency.
In a sense, but invasive implies something foreign. These worms are native to vent environments and have been evolving there for millions of years. They've perfected the art of exploiting these ephemeral habitats.
You mentioned reproduction earlier. How does that work for animals with no mouths?
They have gonads. Males produce sperm, females produce eggs. Males release thread-shaped spermatozoid matter into the water, which can swim to a female's tube for internal fertilization. Females then release lipid-rich eggs into the water column.
And those become the free-swimming larvae?
Exactly, which eventually find a vent, settle, acquire bacteria, lose their guts, and become adults. The cycle continues.
Let's talk about the environment they live in. You mentioned 250 atmospheres of pressure, toxic chemicals, extreme temperatures. How do they survive that?
Multiple adaptations. The tube provides physical protection. It's remarkably tough, especially at the base where it's anchored to the seafloor. The hemoglobin, as I mentioned, handles both oxygen and sulfide without being poisoned by the sulfide. They have extensive branchial surface area, the second highest among aquatic animals after another polychaete wormwobe, for efficient gas exchange.
And the temperature swings?
The vents create intense temperature gradients. Water can be near freezing a few meters away, then hundreds of degrees at the vent opening. Tubeworms position themselves in the sweet spot, warm enough to support their bacterial symbionts, cool enough not to cook.
They're essentially sitting in a hot tub next to a volcano.
That's not a bad analogy, and their blood contains special adaptations to function across a wide range of temperature. The whole organism is a marvel of biochemical engineering.
Okay, so we have these incredible worms living around hydrothermal vents. The 2024 discovery found them living under the vents as well. Were the sub-seafloor worms different in any way?
The same species, Riftia pachytilla, but the finding raised new questions. Some of the worms in the subseafloor cavities were positioned with their plumes extending through cracks into the open water above, while their bodies remained in the cavity below.
Like they're hiding in caves and just poking their heads out to breathe?
Precisely. And the discovery of reproductive adults underground suggests these aren't just worms that accidentally ended up beneath the seafloor. They may be actively choosing to live there.
Why would they prefer underground?
Several possibilities. Protection from predators. There are things that eat tubeworms, including certain fish and crabs. More stable conditions. Temperatures underground might fluctuate less than at the surface. And perhaps access to different chemical gradients. We genuinely don't know yet.
What else was living in those caves?
The full community was diverse. They found the smaller tubeworm species, Oasia alvina, mussels called Bathyomodulus thermophilus, carnivorous polychaete worms, sediment-eating snails, limpets, and various species yet to be identified. It's not just tubeworms. There's an entire ecosystem down there.
All of it dependent on chemical synthesis?
Eventually, yes. The chemosynthetic bacteria form the base of the food web. Some animals host bacteria symbiotically, like the tubeworms. Others graze on bacterial mats. Others are predators or scavengers that eat the grazers. It's a complete ecosystem running on chemical energy.
And we had no idea this was there until 2023.
None. As the researchers wrote in their paper, the study of the sub-seafloor biosphere for animal life has just begun.
Let's pull back and talk about the bigger picture. You mentioned that the 1977 discovery of vent life was revolutionary because it showed ecosystems could exist without sunlight. What are the implications of that?
The implications are profound, spanning everything from how we understand life on Earth to where we search for life in the universe. Let me walk you through it.
Please do.
Before 1977, we believed all life on Earth was ultimately dependent on photosynthesis. Plants capture sunlight, herbivores eat plants, carnivores eat herbivores. The entire web food traces back to the sun. Deep sea life was thought to survive on marine snow, organic particles drifting down from the sunlit surface layer.
Makes sense. Sun powers everything.
But hydrothermal vents broke that paradigm. Here was an ecosystem that derived zero energy from the sun. The primary producers weren't plants using photosynthesis. They were bacteria using chemosynthesis. The energy source wasn't solar radiation, it was geothermal and chemical energy from Earth's interior.
So there are two completely independent energy sources supporting life on this planet.
At least two, yes. And that raises a fascinating question. Which came first?
You mean, did life start at hydrothermal vents?
That's one of the leading hypotheses for the origin of life on Earth. The hydrothermal vent origin theory suggests that life may have first emerged around ancient deep-sea vents 3.5 to 4 billion years ago.
Why would vents be a good place for life to start?
Multiple reasons. Vents provide concentrated chemical energy. The redox gradients between hot vent fluids and cold seawater can drive chemical reactions. They provide mineral surfaces that can catalyze reactions. They create protected environments where organic molecules could accumulate rather than dispersing. And they've existed for billions of years. Hydrothermal activity predates life itself.
So the same conditions that support tubeworms today might have sparked the first living cells?
Possibly. NASA astrobiologists have recreated ancient vent conditions in the laboratory and shown that organic molecules, the building blocks of life, can form under those conditions. Mary Wojtek, director of NASA's astrobiology program, has said there's good support for the hypothesis that life began at hydrothermal vents, and some microorganisms found at vents today appear to trace back to very ancient lineages.
But this isn't proven.
No, it's still debated. Other scientists favor different hypotheses: warm ponds on land, ice surfaces, even delivery of organic molecules from space. But hydrothermal vents remain one of the strongest candidates.
Okay, so that's the Earth angle. You mentioned implications for finding life elsewhere?
This is where it gets exciting. If life can thrive independent of sunlight, sustained by chemical energy and geothermal heat, then the habitable zone around stars, the region where liquid water can exist on a planet's surface, becomes much less important.
Because you don't need to be close to a star if you have internal heat.
Right. And we've discovered several moons in our own solar system that have liquid water oceans beneath icy crusts, maintained not by solar heating, but by tidal forces and internal heat.
Europa.
Europa, yes, Jupiter's moon. Also Enceladus, Saturn's moon, and potentially others like Ganymede, Titan, and even some dwarf planets. These are called ocean worlds, and they're now prime targets for astrobiology.
Does Europa have hydrothermal vents?
We don't know for certain, but the evidence suggests it might. Europa's ocean is thought to be about 50 miles deep, sitting atop a rocky seafloor. If there's volcanic or tectonic activity, there could absolutely be hydrothermal venting.
And if there are vents, then there's a potential energy source for life. NASA's Europa Clipper mission, which launched in late 2024, will perform multiple flybys to study the moon and look for evidence of habitability. What about Enceladus?
Enceladus is even more tantalizing in some ways. We know it has active geysers at its south pole that spew water ice into space. The Cassini spacecraft flew through those plumes and detected all 6 elements essential for life: carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur, plus organic molecules and evidence of hydrothermal activity.
That's a lot of boxes checked.
It's incredibly exciting. Some researchers have modeled whether Earth-based methanogens could survive in Enceladus's ocean and concluded that they could. The chemistry seems compatible with life as we know it.
So when we study tubeworms and vent ecosystems on Earth,
we're essentially studying a template for what alien life might look like. The discovery that life can live beneath the seafloor in volcanic crust expands the possibilities even further. Who knows what might be living inside the rocky mantles of ocean moons?
This is making my brain expand slightly.
Good. That's what science should do.
Let me ask a practical question. How do you search for life on a moon that's covered in ice and 400 miles away?
That's the challenge. For Europa, the ice shell is estimated to be 2 to 20 miles thick. You can't just drill through that with current technology, but there may be ways to sample the ocean indirectly.
The plumes on Enceladus?
Exactly. A future mission could fly through those plumes and collect samples, just like Cassini did. For Europa, there's evidence that material from the ocean may reach the surface through cracks and upwellings. A lander could potentially sample ice that originated from the subsurface ocean.
And what would you be looking for?
Biosignatures, organic molecules that are associated with life, amino acids, lipids, certain ratios of carbon isotopes, or ideally, actual cells. The challenge is distinguishing biology from geology, since some organic molecules can form without life.
Like those amino acids NASA made in the lab.
Right. Abiotic chemistry can produce some of the same molecules that life makes. We'd need patterns that are clearly biological, molecular complexity, specific chirality, biomolecules that only life makes.
This is a long-term project.
Decades at least. But every discovery we make in Earth's deep oceans informs these searches. The 2024 subsurface finding tells us that life can hide in places we hadn't considered. If we're designing instruments to search for life on other worlds, we need to account for the possibility that it's not just on the seafloor, it might be inside the rock itself.
Has anyone proposed going to Europa or Enceladus and looking in their equivalent of subsurface caves?
There are concept missions for submersibles that could melt through the ice and explore the oceans directly. They're called cryobots and hydrobots, but we're talking technology that doesn't fully exist yet.
Science fiction becoming science fact.
Eventually, yes, and what we learn from Earth's hydrothermal vents and subsurface ecosystems will guide those missions. We're essentially doing reconnaissance on our own planet to prepare for exploring others.
So giant tubeworms are astronaut trainers.
In a sense, they're showing us what's possible. If life can evolve to live without sunlight, without oxygen, feeding on toxic chemicals, in crushing pressure, in superheated or near freezing water, then maybe life can evolve anywhere there's liquid water and chemical energy.
That's a much broader definition of habitable than I grew up with.
The discovery of hydrothermal vent life fundamentally expanded our definition, and the 2024 subsurface finding expands it again. We're continually learning that life is more tenacious, more creative, and more widespread than we imagined.
Okay, Elena, we need to talk about the elephant in the room. Or, I guess, the mining ship on the ocean. What's the deal with deep-sea mining?
This is the part that keeps marine biologists up at night. Deep sea mining is the proposed extraction of mineral deposits from the ocean floor, including polymetallic nodules, cobalt-rich crusts on seamounts, and seafloor massive sulfides from hydrothermal vent zones.
What minerals are we talking about?
Copper, zinc, gold, silver, cobalt, nickel, manganese, rare earth elements, materials that are in high demand for electronics, batteries, and renewable energy technology. The irony is that some of these minerals are wanted for green technologies, like electric vehicle batteries and wind turbines.
So saving the planet above water might destroy the planet below water?
That's the tension. And vent zones are particularly valuable because they contain high concentrations of certain metals. The hot fluids precipitate out minerals as they cool, creating sulfide deposits rich in copper and zinc. Some deposits contain gold and silver concentrations higher than land-based mines.
And companies want to mine these.
Some do, yes. The International Seabed Authority, the UN body responsible for managing the seabed in international waters, has been considering regulations for deep-sea mining. Several countries and companies have exploration contracts.
What would mining look like at a hydrothermal vent?
Devastating, frankly. The proposals involve using large seafloor machines, essentially underwater bulldozers, to cut away the sulfide chimneys and deposits. The material would be brought to the surface for processing.
And everything living on those chimneys?
Would be destroyed. The tubeworms, the mussels, the snails, the crabs, the bacteria, everything. Mining an active vent site would obliterate the ecosystem completely.
Can it recover?
That's the big question, and the honest answer is, we don't know. Individual vents are ephemeral. They can go dormant naturally when volcanic activity shifts. New vents form elsewhere. Vent animals have evolved to cope with this patchiness, which is why larval dispersal is so important.
So, theoretically, animals could recolonize after mining?
Theoretically. But mining isn't like natural vent death. Natural succession leaves the substrate intact, the rock, the cavities, the fissures. Mining would physically remove or destroy that substrate. And now that we know life extends into the subsea floor, any drilling or excavation could disrupt underground habitat and dispersal corridors we didn't even know existed.
The 2024 discovery makes this worse.
Much worse. Before, we only worried about surface communities. Now we know there's a whole additional dimension of life beneath the seafloor that could be impacted. As the researchers stated in their paper, the discovery of animal habitats in the crustal subsea floor, the extent of which is currently unknown, increases the urgency for protections against potential future environmental changes.
Future environmental changes is a diplomatic way to say mining.
Among other things, yes. The researchers specifically worried that major drilling or excavation could redirect hydrothermal flows, the underground rivers of hot water that animals depend on. Change the plumbing and you change everything.
What do scientists want?
Most vent scientists, and this is a pretty unified position, want active hydrothermal vents protected from mining in perpetuity. Not moratoriums, not temporary bans, but permanent protection. They argue that the scientific and intrinsic value of these ecosystems far outweighs the mineral value.
What about inactive vents?
That's more contested. Some argue inactive vents could potentially be mined with less ecological damage. But even inactive vent deposits harbor life, often different species than active vents, but still unique. And now we know the subsea floor habitat might connect active and inactive areas. Drawing a line between mineable and protected is harder than it seems.
What's the case for mining?
Proponents argue that deep-sea minerals could reduce our dependence on problematic land-based mining operations, some of which involve deforestation, toxic waste, and exploitative labor practices. They argue that if we need these materials for the green energy transition, perhaps ocean mining is the lesser evil.
You don't sound convinced.
I'm not, for several reasons. First, we don't fully understand what we'd be destroying. The 2024 discovery is just the latest example of how little we know about these ecosystems. Second, the damage would be essentially permanent on human scales. These communities take decades to centuries to develop if they recover at all. Third, there are alternatives: recycling, material substitution, reduced consumption.
And the ethical argument?
Is substantial. These are some of the oldest continuous ecosystems on Earth, possibly tracing back billions of years. They may hold clues to the origin of life. They contain species found nowhere else, potential medicines, enzymes, biotechnologies we haven't discovered yet. Once destroyed, they're gone.
What's the current status?
Complicated. In 2021, IUCN members, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, adopted a resolution calling for a moratorium on deep-sea mining until various conditions are met, including comprehensive understanding of impacts and effective protection measures. Several countries have implemented or called for moratoriums.
But mining could still happen?
The ISA continues developing regulations. There's pressure from some quarters to start commercial operations. The regulations are supposed to include environmental protections, but many scientists doubt they're sufficient given how little we understand about deep-sea ecosystems.
What do Monica Bright and her team say?
They've been explicit. In announcing the 2024 discovery, Bright said, "With this understanding, we also know that we not only need to protect what we see on the surface, but we should also protect what is living below, because it is one important component of this ecosystem."
So the discovery of subsea floor life strengthens the case for protection.
Significantly. You can't protect vent ecosystems if you don't know their full extent. Now we know they extend underground, possibly far underground, possibly connecting multiple vent fields. Mining proponents can no longer claim they're only affecting surface communities.
Are there any specific proposals for protecting these areas?
Some event fields have been designated as marine protected areas by various countries. There are proposals for ecologically and biologically significant areas designations. The Galapagos rest vents, ironically where it all started in 1977, sit in international waters near known mineral deposits and have been suggested for EBSA protection.
This feels like a race between understanding and exploitation.
That's exactly what it is. We're discovering new ecosystems faster than we can protect them, while economic interests push to exploit them before protections are established. It's a familiar pattern from land-based conservation, now playing out in the deep ocean.
What can regular people do?
Stay informed, support organizations advocating for deep-sea protection, recognize that sustainable products aren't sustainable if they require mining irreplaceable ecosystems, and maybe, just maybe, question whether we need every electronic gadget we're told we need.
You're getting philosophical.
It's hard not to when you've spent your career studying ecosystems that existed for billions of years and could be destroyed in decades for profit.
We're approaching the end, and I want to zoom out one more time. The document I came to this episode with positioned this discovery under paradoxes that break reality. What does that mean to you?
The paradox is that these creatures shouldn't exist by our intuitive understanding of life. Life needs sunlight, except they don't. Animals need to eat food, except they have no digestive system. Complex ecosystems need stable environments, except vents are ephemeral and violent. At every turn, tubeworms and vent communities defy our expectations.
Is that what makes them so fascinating to scientists?
Absolutely. They're model organisms in the best sense. They force us to rethink assumptions. Every time we think we understand the limits of life, they show us new possibilities.
What questions remain unanswered?
How much time do you have? But let me highlight a few big ones. First, how extensive is the sub-seafloor biosphere? The 2024 discovery only looked at a small area. Do these ecosystems extend under every vent field? How deep can animals survive beneath the seafloor? Is there connectivity between distant vent fields through underground channels?
The underground highway system.
Exactly. We need to map it. Second, how do larvae know where to go? Tubeworm larvae appear to detect chemical signatures of active vents, but what exactly are they sensing? How do they navigate through the sub-seafloor? This has implications for understanding how any species colonizes extreme environments.
What else?
The evolutionary history fascinates me. When did chemosynthetic symbiosis first evolve? How did tubeworms lose their digestive systems and become completely dependent on bacteria? Are there intermediate forms we haven't found? Genomic studies are starting to answer these questions, but we're still piecing together the story.
And the astrobiology angle?
That's a whole research program. If life on Earth originated at hydrothermal vents, what were the key steps? Can we recreate them in the lab? And crucially, would life on other worlds take similar paths? If we find life on Europa or Enceladus, would it resemble vent life on Earth, or would it be something completely different?
My head is spinning. What's coming next in this field?
Several things. Gaia Data Release 4 and 5 should reveal more about... Wait, wrong episode.
My head is spinning. Wrong cosmic object.
Let me try again. For deep-sea research, we're going to see more expeditions to the sub-seafloor. The Schmidt Ocean Institute is continuing work in this area. There are proposals for dedicated drilling and sampling programs to systematically explore what lives beneath different vent systems.
Technology-wise?
Better ROVs, more sophisticated sensors, improved sampling techniques that minimize disturbance. There's discussion of autonomous underwater vehicles that could explore for longer periods and cover more territory. And on the analysis side, better genomic and proteomic tools to understand what we collect.
And the conservation timeline?
Urgent. The ISA is developing mining regulations now. The window to establish strong protections is narrowing. Scientists are pushing for precautionary measures. Don't allow what we can't prove is safe.
That seems like a reasonable standard.
You'd think so, but economic interests often push for the opposite. Allow what hasn't been proven harmful. Given how little we understand about deep-sea ecosystems, that's a recipe for disaster.
What gives you hope?
The discoveries themselves. Every time we look, we find something remarkable. The 2024 sub-seafloor discovery wasn't an endpoint, it's a beginning. Scientists are energized, public interest is growing, and there's increasing recognition that the deep ocean has intrinsic value beyond its mineral content.
Plus, the astrobiology connection brings new stakeholders.
Good point. NASA and other space agencies care deeply about vent research because it informs their missions. That creates additional voices advocating for protection and study. Strange as it sounds, the search for aliens might help save earthly tubeworms.
That's a beautiful irony.
Marine biology is full of them. Giant worms without mouths feeding on poison, underground ecosystems beneath volcanic caves, life thriving where life shouldn't exist. It's irony all the way down.
Or all the way up if you're a tubeworm poking its plume through a crack in the seafloor.
See, you're thinking like a marine biologist now.
All right, Elena, we need to wrap up. Final thoughts on giant tubeworms and the world beneath the ocean floor.
I think the 2024 discovery reminds us how much we still have to learn about our own planet. We've been studying hydrothermal vents for almost 50 years, and we just discovered animals living beneath them. What else is down there that we haven't found?
The known unknowns versus the unknown unknowns.
Exactly, and that uncertainty should make us humble. Before we mine, before we drill, before we disrupt, we should understand what we're affecting. The subseafloor biosphere was hidden in plain sight, right beneath the ecosystems we thought we knew. What elder hidden worlds are we overlooking?
And for the listeners who want to know what to take away from this,
3 things. First, life is more resilient, more creative, and more widespread than we imagined. Tubeworms with no digestive systems living on toxic chemicals 1.6 miles underwater. That's not science fiction, that's Earth. Second, we're still discovering fundamental things about our own planet. The deep ocean is the largest habitat on Earth, and we've barely begun to explore it. Third, these ecosystems are precious and irreplaceable. The decisions we make in the next few years about deep-sea mining will affect communities that have existed for millions of years.
heavy stuff.
But also wondrous stuff. I don't want people to come away from this feeling only doom. These discoveries are incredible. We're living in an age where we can send robots to the bottom of the ocean, flip over volcanic rocks, and find secret ecosystems. That's amazing.
The horror and the wonder side by side.
Always. That's what exploring the unknown is all about.
Well, on that note, thank you, Elena, for walking us through the wonderful weirdness of giant tubeworms and their underground kingdom.
Thanks for having me, Marcus, and thanks to everyone listening for joining us in the abyss.
Until next time, remember, the ocean floor isn't the floor. It's just the roof of something stranger.
Perfect closing. I'm stealing that.
I'm Marcus Chen.
And I'm Dr. Elena.
Stay curious, and maybe think twice before you buy that new gadget.
The tubeworms will thank you.